Officer Krell of Station 17 Security had exactly 4 hours left on his shift, and he'd planned to spend them doing what he did best. Absolutely nothing. He had reports to file, sure. 3 of them. From last month. But in his professional opinion, paperwork was a problem for future Krell, and future Krell was an idiot who deserved everything he got. Then his comm unit chirped. Security response needed at Nebula's end. Noise complaint, possible public disturbance. And the dispatcher paused, which was never good. Dispatchers didn't pause unless something weird was happening, and weird meant paperwork. Reports of unauthorized financial consultation occurring on premises. Krell stared at his comm unit with all 4 of his eyes, which as a Vraxian gave him twice the capacity for disbelief as most species. Financial consultation? In a bar? Affirmative. Also reports of coordinated rhythmic shouting. That's called singing. Dispatch. The caller specifically said it wasn't singing. Quote, "This is something worse than singing." Krell heaved himself up from his desk, his exoskeleton creaking in protest. 23 years he'd been doing this job. 23 years of breaking up fights between drunk Blurrillians and stopping Quellan teenagers from spray-painting tentacle graffiti on the hull. He'd kept the peace through 3 different administrations, 2 hull breaches, and 1 very awkward hostage situation that turned out to be an improv theater rehearsal. And now, financial consultation. At a bar. "Come on, Pip," he called to his partner, who was hiding behind a filing cabinet and clearly hoping Krell had forgotten he existed. Pip emerged reluctantly, all 3 of his eyes blinking in different directions, which happened when he was nervous, which was always, "Do we have to? My shift ends in 4 hours and 6 minutes. Not that I'm counting." "You're literally counting. I might have a spreadsheet." Krell grabbed his citation pad and headed for the door, his forearms already tired just thinking about the paperwork. "Let me guess. Humans?" The dispatcher chirped back immediately. "How did you know?" "Because it's always humans." Krell jabbed the door controls harder than necessary. 20 species on this station, and somehow chaos follows exactly 2 of them around like a lost puppy. Pip scurried after him, his stubby legs working double time. Maybe it won't be bad? Maybe they're just helping someone fill out tax forms and singing a polite song about financial responsibility? Krell looked at his partner. Pip wilted under the 4-eyed stare. "Right," Pip squeaked. "Who am I kidding? I'll prep the incident forms." They headed down Corridor 7 toward the Commerce District, where Nebula's End squatted between a ship parts depot and a very optimistic restaurant that kept trying to make Zentarii cuisine happen. It wasn't going to happen. Nothing that required 3 stomachs to digest properly was ever going to be a commercial success. As they got closer, Krell could hear it, the rhythmic shouting, or singing, or whatever unholy combination humans had decided to inflict on the universe tonight. 97 bottles of beer on the wall, 97 bottles of beer, that's counting, Pip observed nervously. Why are they counting backward? Is it a threat? Are they counting down to something? I think that's the least of our problems. Because underneath the counting, Krell could hear something even more disturbing. Enthusiastic agreement. Multiple species, different vocal ranges, all apparently very invested in whatever was happening to these bottles of beer. They reached the entrance to Nebula's End, just as the counting hit 95. Through the reinforced window, Krell could see approximately 20 beings of various species crowded around 2 humans who were standing on a table. "Oh no," Pip whispered. "Oh yes," Krell corrected grimly. "And I'm filing this under your name." He pushed open the Koster vent. Pip whispered it bill time and in slash. He pushed open the Kimity Poster vent door, and the sound hit them like a physical force. The interior of Nebula's End looked like someone had taken a Galactic Council meeting, added alcohol, subtracted dignity, and then set the whole thing to music. 23 beings Krell counted, because he was going to have to list every single one of them in his report, were crammed into a space designed for maybe 15. They were banging on tables. They were swaying. A Clickton was doing something with its mandibles that might have been harmonizing, and in the center of it all, standing on a table like they were leading a revolution instead of a drinking song, were 2 humans. The first was built like a cargo hauler, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a shirt that proclaimed, "I void warranties," in 3 languages. His name tag, because apparently he'd made name tags, said Jake Kowalski. He was conducting the crowd with both hands, grinning like this was the best moment of his entire life. The second human was smaller, with her hair tied back and a smile that probably got her out of speeding tickets. Her name tag read, Priya Okonkwo. She was keeping time by banging a datapad against the table, and every third beat she'd point at someone in the crowd who would then shout with extra enthusiasm. 94 bottles of beer on the wall, 94 bottles of beer, the crowd bellowed. A shardling, a crystalline being whose species communicated primarily through light pulses, was somehow managing to flash in rhythm. Take one down, pass it around, 93 bottles of beer on the wall. Krell had several questions, the primary one being, what had he done to deserve this? The bartender, a mantis-like Clickton named Razor, stood behind the bar with his blade arms crossed, watching the chaos with an expression that Krell recognized. It was the look of someone who'd started the evening certain about the rules of reality and was now questioning everything. Razor, Krell said loudly, trying to be heard, over the countdown to 92 bottles. You called this in? Razor's antennae twitched. I thought I did, but now I'm not entirely sure it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. Is it, though? Razor gestured with one blade arm at the crowd. Look at them. A Blorilian and a Zentarii are sharing a table. Do you know what happened the last time those two species shared anything? The War of 7 Systems. 7 systems, Krell. He had a point. Goop the Blorilian, a slug-like being who usually oozed contempt for everyone, had his amorphous body draped half over a bench, one pseudopod wrapped around the shoulder of a Zentarii merchant who typically refused to acknowledge that Blorilians had achieved sentience. They were singing together. Badly, but together. 91 bottles of beer on the wall. Krell raised all 4 arms. Station security. Everyone stopped singing immediately. Nobody stopped singing. In fact, a small clinic they were basically sentient hamsters started singing louder, possibly to compensate for its size. Priya looked over, noticed them for the first time, and her smile somehow got wider. Oh good, security's here. Jake, we got official witnesses now. Outstanding, Jake boomed, his voice carrying easily over the countdown to 90 bottles. He pointed at Krell with both hands, like he was firing finger guns. Officers, perfect timing. We're just finishing up the cultural portion of tonight's program before we move on to the educational seminar. Pip made a sound like a small animal dying. Educational seminar? You're all under investigation for disturbing the peace, Krell announced, pulling out his citation pad. And someone mentioned unauthorized financial consultation, which… Oh, the tax thing. Priya hopped down from the table with disturbing agility, landing in front of Krell with that smile still plastered on her face. Yeah, that's the seminar. See, we were just hanging out, having a drink, when Goop over there mentioned he was worried about his upcoming audit. Goop raised a pseudopod in confirmation. The Galactic Revenue Service is very intimidating to those of us with non-standard morphology. And I said, buddy, have I got news for you? Jake continued, also jumping down from the table. The crowd was now humming the tune to 90 bottles, apparently unwilling to let the song die just because law enforcement had arrived. Turns out, nobody on this station understands deductions. Nobody. It's tragic. It's criminal. It's leaving money on the table. So we offered to help, Priya said brightly. Krell looked at them, looked at his partner, who was trying to become one with the wall, looked back at the humans. You're teaching tax evasion. Tax optimization, Jake corrected, holding up one finger. Evasion is illegal. Optimization is patriotic. Or whatever the galactic equivalent of patriotic is. Civic-minded, Priya supplied. Right. We're being civic-minded as heck. Behind them, the crowd had reached 87 bottles of beer and showed no signs of stopping. Krell felt a headache forming in 3 of his 4 brain lobes. Krell had faced down armed smugglers with more composure than he currently felt, staring at 2 unarmed humans and their makeshift classroom of enthusiastic tax protesters. You can't just hold a financial seminar in a bar without proper licensing. Can't we, though? Jake gestured around at the crowd, which had finally reached the end of their bottles of beer countdown, and was now applauding themselves with various appendages. I don't see any money changing hands. This is just friends helping friends. Very legal. Very cool. Nothing about this is cool, Pip whispered, but nobody heard him. Priya had already pulled up a holographic display from her datapad. The title flickered to life above the table in letters 2 feet tall. Deductions. The Galactic Revenue Service doesn't want you to know about. Oh no, Krell said. Oh yes, Priya, replied, echoing his earlier words with definitely intentional mockery. Okay, everyone, let's get started. Who here owns their own ship or business? 14 appendages of various types went up. Perfect. Now who here has properly depreciated their equipment over the last fiscal cycle? The appendages slowly lowered. A Quellen in the back, not Pip, thank the void, made a confused chirping sound. That's what I thought. Priya advanced to the next slide, which showed a dizzying array of forms and calculations. See, the GRS allows for accelerated depreciation on any equipment used in commerce, but most species don't know you can also claim your life support system as a business expense if you work from your ship even 1 day per month. Wait, really? Wait, Goop's voice burbled with interest. What about moisture maintenance? I spend 4,000 credits a year keeping my tank properly humidified. Jake snapped his fingers. Perfect example. If you use your tank while conducting any business communications, that's a workspace. Workspace maintenance is fully deductible. You got a home office deduction right there, my gelatinous friend. Goop's entire body quivered with what might have been joy. Several other beings leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Krell tried again. You can't just... There are regulations about financial advice. We're not financial advisors, Jake said cheerfully. We're just two concerned citizens sharing publicly available information, First Amendment rights, or whatever the Galactic Charter equivalent is. Article 7, Section 3, Subsection B. A Zentarii in a business suit called out. Freedom of information exchange in non-commercial contexts. See? Priya grinned. We did our homework. Now, let's talk about the meal deduction. If you eat while discussing business, and let's be real, we're all always discussing business, that's 50% deductible. 50% of all meals? A crystalline shardling named? Glint chimed in, literally, its voice like bells. I consume 17 pounds of silicate weekly. Document it, deduct it, Jake said. Next slide. Transportation costs. If you're traveling between your home and a temporary work location, that's fully deductible. And here's the beautiful part, the GRS defines temporary as anything under 2 years. A furry Vorlaxian raised a paw. I've been doing a contract on Station 12 for 18 months. Boom. Deductible. Every single trip. Krell watched in horror as beings who normally couldn't agree on which side of the corridor to walk on were now nodding in unison, taking notes, and asking detailed follow-up questions. This was supposed to be a noise complaint. This had turned into something far worse. Education. What about research expenses? Glint asked, its facets refracting light as it vibrated with excitement. I spend considerable resources experimenting with new crystallization techniques. Priya clicked to another slide. Research and development, fully deductible if it's related to your business. And here's a fun one, failed experiments, also deductible. You can write off failures. That seems like it violates causality. Pip muttered. It violates my will to live, Krell corrected. You're teaching an entire bar full of aliens how to pay less taxes. We're teaching them their rights as taxpayers, Jake said, and somehow made it sound noble. Knowledge is power, officer. We're empowering the masses. You're empowering an audit. Only if you do it wrong. Jake advanced to the next slide. Common mistakes, and how to avoid them. See, the key is documentation. The GRS can't challenge what you can prove. Keep records, save receipts, take photos. Be meticulous. A Blurrillian in the corner raised a pseudopod. What if our species doesn't have hands to keep physical records? Digital's fine. Better, actually. Harder to lose, easier to organize. And Priya's smile turned slightly wicked. If you're storing business records, your data storage costs are also deductible. The bar erupted in excited chatter. Species that had been mortal enemies 20 minutes ago were now comparing note-taking methods and discussing filing systems. Krell looked at Razor, who shrugged all 4 of his blade arms. I stopped understanding what was happening around slide 3, but my annual bar license renewal fee is next month, and I'm suddenly wondering if any of this applies to me. It does, Jake called out, apparently possessing the hearing of a surveillance drone. Commercial property depreciation, entertainment expenses for customer appreciation, and if you've got a back office, that's workspace deduction territory. Razor pulled out a datapad. Go on. Krell felt something inside him break. It might have been his faith in order. It might have been his spine. I need to sit down. 93 bottles of beer just freed up, Pip offered weakly. Krell had sat down. This was a mistake, because sitting down implied he'd accepted the situation, and the situation was not acceptable. But his legs, all 4 of them, because Vraxians had redundancy in their limbs for exactly these kinds of emergencies, had simply given up. Pip remained standing, mostly because he was too nervous to commit to either enforcing the law or abandoning it entirely. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, like a broken traffic signal. Okay, Pip said, his voice somehow getting even higher. Okay, so, the tax thing. That's technically legal, apparently? But the singing, the coordinated rhythmic shouting that was described as worse than singing. Surely that's still a violation of the noise ordinance? Priya looked genuinely offended. That wasn't just singing. That was cultural exchange. It was 99 verses about beer, Krell said flatly. Exactly. Jake spread his arms wide, nearly hitting a Quellan who ducked just in time. See, humans figured out something important about 3,000 years ago. You can't really know someone until you've suffered through something together. Shared hardship builds bonds. And a song with 99 verses is hardship? Razor asked, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. You lived through it. You tell me. Razor considered this. My joints ache, my throat hurts, and I'm questioning my life choices. But I also feel strangely closer to Goop than I did an hour ago. And historically speaking, my species considers his species to be evolutionary mistakes. See? Priya beamed. Cultural diplomacy. We started with 99 bottles because it's simple, repetitive, and everyone suffers equally. It's the foundation. After that, we moved on to more advanced material. Advanced material, Krell repeated. We taught them Sweet Caroline, Jake said proudly. Got a Zentarii merchant doing the ba-ba-ba part. Nearly brought a tear to my eye. Glint chimed in, literally vibrating with enthusiasm. And Country Roads. I have memorized all 4 verses and the chorus. Would you like to hear it? No, Krell and Pip said in unison. I would like to hear it, Goop burbled. It speaks to me. The longing for home. The sense of belonging to a place. I too am almost heaven. A Vorlaxian nodded sagely, its fur rippling. The mountain mama called to me. None of you have mountains, Krell said desperately. Goop, you're from a swamp planet. You specifically evolved to avoid elevated terrain. The mountains are metaphorical, Priya explained, like she was talking to a child. It's about the feeling, the yearning. That's what makes it universal. Jake pulled out his datapad and started scrolling. We also got through most of The Engineer's Drinking Song. That's got 17 verses about thermodynamics and the increasing entropy of closed systems. Really brings people together through shared confusion. I understood verse 12, Glint said proudly. The one about heat death. Nobody understands verse 12, Jake said. That's the point. You sing it anyway. You commit to the bit. That's human culture right there. Pip was blinking all 3 eyes in different rhythms now, which meant he was approaching a complete mental breakdown. But why? Why would you teach aliens drinking songs? What possible benefit does this provide? Priya hopped back up on the table, and Krell was too tired to stop her. Because, Officer Pip, your Galactic Council has spent 200 years trying to build interspecies cooperation through committees, treaties, and strongly worded memos. You know how many species actually like each other after 2 centuries of diplomacy? 7? Pip guessed. 3. And 2 of them are only cooperating because they both hate the third one. She gestured at the crowd. We've been here for 6 hours. 6. Look around. A Blorilian is sharing a table with a Zentarii. A Clickton is harmonizing with a Plinic. A Shardling is requesting encores. Country Roads, take me home, Glint chimed hopefully. Not now, buddy, Jake said gently. Point is, humans figured this out a long time ago. You want people to work together? Give them something bigger than themselves to struggle with. Could be a war, could be a project, could be remembering the lyrics to a song that somebody definitely made up while extremely drunk. Razor clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. I once participated in a council-mandated team-building exercise. We spent 8 hours discussing our feelings and left hating each other more than when we started. Tonight I learned that a Blorilian's favorite color is purple. A Zentarii can't carry a tune to save his life. And we all agree that verse 7 of the Engineer's song doesn't scan properly. Verse 7 is garbage, Goop agreed. The rhyme scheme falls apart completely. Right? The Zentarii merchant added. You can't rhyme entropy with certainly. It's lazy writing. They were bonding over criticizing human poetry. Krell watched it happen in real time and felt something in his worldview crack. This is insane, he said, but with less conviction than before. This is humanity, Priya corrected. We show up, we make friends, we teach questionable songs and even more questionable financial strategies, and somehow everyone ends up better for it. Except maybe the tax revenue department. Definitely not them, Jake agreed cheerfully. A Vorlaxian in the back raised its paw again. Could we learn another song? Something with a good rhythm for fur rippling? Oh, I got just the thing, Jake said, pulling up something on his datapad. It's called The Scotsman, and it's about a man, a kilt, and a deeply regrettable encounter with some ladies. Features a vocabulary word you're all gonna love. We should probably stop this, Pip whispered to Krell. Krell looked at his partner, looked at the crowd of previously antagonistic species now eagerly awaiting their next lesson in human culture, looked at his citation pad, which he'd forgotten he was holding. Yeah, he said. We should. Neither of them moved. The crowd began to chant, testing out the word. Krell's headache had spread to all 4 brain lobes. The door to Nebula's end slammed open with the kind of dramatic force that suggested someone had practiced the motion specifically for moments like this. Station Commander Thrace stood in the entrance, his Zentarai frame filling the doorway, his ceremonial shoulder plates catching the light in a way that was definitely intentional. What? Thrace announced, his voice dripping with the kind of authority that came from attending too many leadership seminars. Is the meaning of this? The bar went silent. Even Glint stopped chiming mid-note. Krell stood up slowly, his forearms spreading in what he hoped was a calming gesture. Commander, sir, we have the situation under control. Under control. Thrace stepped inside, his boots clicking against the floor with each step. He was flanked by 2 junior officers, who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. I received reports of sedition, tax fraud, and something called cultural terrorism. That last one's a bit dramatic, Jake muttered. Thrace's head swiveled toward him with mechanical precision. You, human, you are under arrest for inciting financial rebellion, disturbing the peace, and corrupting station residents with dangerous ideology. Dangerous ideology? Priya crossed her arms. We taught them about deductions. You taught them to defy the Galactic Revenue Service. Thrace's voice rose to a pitch that suggested he'd missed his calling as an opera singer. The GRS is the backbone of civilized society. Without tax revenue, we have no infrastructure, no services, no overpriced defense contracts, Jake offered. Middle management positions that serve no function? Committee meetings about forming committees? Thrace's face, well, the part of his face that could change color flushed deep purple. You will come with me, both of you, and every being in this establishment will be questioned as material witnesses. Now hold on, Razor said, his blade arms unfolding. These 2 haven't done anything wrong. They've committed multiple violations of, they helped me understand my rights as a taxpayer, Goop interrupted, his gelatinous form rippling with what might have been indignation. Is that illegal now? Understanding rights? A Vorlaxian stood up. They taught us about documentation. They taught us about community, the Zentarii merchant added. They taught us Sweet Caroline, Glint chimed, apparently missing the room's tone entirely. Thrace looked around the bar, and Krell could see the exact moment the commander realized he'd miscalculated. The crowd wasn't scared. They weren't intimidated. They were unified, and unified groups were dangerous. You're all defending them? Thrace sputtered. These humans show up and corrupt an entire bar in one evening, and you're defending them? Corrupt is a strong word, Priya said. We prefer educated. I'll have you both transferred to a penal colony so remote it doesn't have a designation, just coordinates. Thrace jabbed a finger at Jake and Priya. Guards, arrest these 2 immediately. The 2 junior officers looked at each other, looked at the crowd, which had formed a protective semicircle around the humans, looked back at Thrace. Sir, one of them said carefully, there are approximately 23 civilians here, and regulations state that we need to assess the threat level before. I'm the threat level. I'm assessing it right now! Maximum threat! Krell cleared his throat. Commander, with respect, perhaps we should. I don't recall asking for your input, Officer Krell. Thrace rounded on him. In fact, I'm questioning why you haven't already detained these troublemakers. Unless, his eyes narrowed. You've been compromised as well. Compromised? Krell felt all 4 of his fists clenching. 23 years of service, 23 years of keeping the peace, filing reports, and dealing with idiots in positions of authority. Sir, I've been doing my job, which includes assessing whether a situation actually requires arrests or just requires common sense. Pip squeaked, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. Thrace's attention swiveled to the small Quellen. What did you say? Pip's 3 eyes blinked in terror, but something maybe the last 6 hours of watching humans turn chaos into community Maybe the 3 bottles of synthetic courage he'd consumed while waiting for Krell to make a decision. Maybe just exhaustion made him continue. I said common sense, sir. These humans haven't hurt anyone. They've actually made things better. Sort of. In a weird way. Better? Thrace looked like he was about to explode. They've undermined the tax system. They've explained the tax system, Razor corrected. There's a difference. They've corrupted innocent aliens with their barbaric customs. Barbaric? Goop's entire body quivered with offense. I'll have you know Country Roads is a masterpiece of emotional resonance. Take me home, Glint chimed supportively. Thrace pulled out his own citation pad, his hands shaking. Fine, fine. If you won't arrest them, I will. I'm citing everyone in this establishment for conspiracy, accessory to financial fraud, and, he looked at Glint, noise violations, especially you. The bar erupted, not in violence but in protest. 23 beings of different species, who 6 hours ago couldn't agree on the temperature settings in the corridor, now shouted in unison. Well, not exactly unison, the Shardling was chiming. The Blorillian was burbling, and the Plinic was making angry hamster sounds, but the intent was unified. They weren't going to let this happen. Krell watched his commander face down a crowd that was about 3 seconds away from turning into a mob, and made a decision that was going to absolutely ruin his career. Commander Thrace, he said loudly, stepping between Thrace and the crowd. I'm invoking Article 12, Section 7 of the station's security guidelines. Thrace blinked. What? De-escalation protocols. This situation is about to become a riot, and station regulations give me the authority to resolve it through alternative means. Krell turned to face Jake and Priya. You two, come with me. Now. Jake and Priya exchanged glances, then shrugged in that uniquely human way that suggested they'd been in worse situations and lived to tell the tale. They stepped forward, and Krell could feel the tension in the room spike. Wait, Goop burbled, oozing forward. Officer Krell, you can't just— Krell held up one hand, cutting him off. I'm exercising my authority as responding officer. Everyone else stays here. Commander Thrace, you'll get your arrests. Clean. By the book. No riot, no incident report that makes us all look incompetent. Thrace's face was still purple, but Krell could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. A riot would mean paperwork, mountains of it, explanations to the council, possibly an inquiry into why a station commander had provoked a multi-species mob over tax advice. Fine, Thrace said through clenched teeth, but I want them processed immediately. Full charges. Maximum penalties. Understood, sir. Krell gestured toward the door with 2 of his arms. After you, Commander. Thrace swept out with his 2 junior officers in tow, his shoulder plates still catching the light dramatically. The moment he was gone, the tension in the bar shifted from impending violence to confused concern. Officer Krell, Razor said carefully, his mandibles clicking. What are you— Finishing my shift? Krell interrupted. Pip, you're with me. Everyone else stays here, enjoys the rest of their evening, and forgets this ever happened. Understood? The crowd murmured agreement, though Glint chimed something that sounded suspiciously like the chorus of Country Roads. Krell ushered Jake and Priya out of the bar, Pip trailing behind like a nervous shadow. Once they were in the corridor and out of earshot, Krell stopped walking. Okay, Jake said, his earlier cheerfulness fading into something more cautious. So what's the play here? Good cop routine before you throw us in a cell? The play, Krell said, pulling out his citation pad and very deliberately not looking at either of them, is that I'm going to file a report stating that I responded to a noise complaint at Nebula's End. Upon arrival, I found a small gathering that had exceeded acceptable volume levels. I issued a verbal warning, and the gathering dispersed peacefully. No arrests were necessary. Priya's eyebrows went up. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened, from a certain point of view. Krell finally looked at them, all 4 eyes making sure they understood what he wasn't saying. However, in the interest of preventing future incidents, I'm going to strongly suggest that if you want to continue your cultural exchange program, tax education seminar, Jake corrected with a grin that was slowly returning. Whatever you want to call it, you do it in Sector 7, residential area, fewer noise complaints, and coincidentally, a section of the station that Commander Thrace considers beneath his attention. He hasn't patrolled there in 3 years. Pip's 3 eyes went wide. Officer Krell, are you— is this— We're doing our jobs, Pip. Our job is to keep the peace. Sometimes that means arrests. Sometimes that means pointing problematic elements toward areas where they'll cause less disruption. Krell looked back at the humans. Next week, Sector 7, Residential Lounge B. I hear it's got excellent acoustics. Jake's grin was now full force. You're a beautiful four-armed angel of chaos, you know that? I'm an officer trying to survive 4 more hours of his shift without additional paperwork. Krell started walking again, gesturing for them to follow. Now we're going to walk toward processing. Take a very slow route that happens to pass by the civilian docking bay, and somehow you're going to give me the slip somewhere around Corridor 12. I'm going to be very upset about it and file a report about suspects evading custody. Understood? Crystal clear, Priya said. Good. And if you get caught by Thrace before you make it back to your ship, I never had this conversation. They walked in silence for a moment, passing through the commercial district toward the docking bays. Other beings gave them a wide berth. 2 humans in custody was apparently worth avoiding. Can I ask you something? Jake said after a while. You're going to anyway. Fair. Why are you doing this? The tax stuff, the singing, all of it. We really did break about a dozen regulations tonight. Krell was quiet for a moment, his forearms swinging as he walked. 23 years I've been doing this job. You know what the hardest part is? It's not the fights, or the smugglers, or even the paperwork. It's watching species who could be friends, could be partners, could build something better together, watching them choose to hate each other instead. Because it's easier. Because it's traditional. Because some war 300 years ago says they're supposed to. He stopped at an intersection, checked both directions with his multiple eyes, then continued. Then you 2 show up. 6 hours in a bar, and suddenly a Blorillian and a Zentarii are arguing about poetry together. Not arguing about territory or resources or ancient grudges. Poetry. Terrible poetry about thermodynamics, but still. The engineer's song is a cultural treasure, Priya said with mock offense. The engineer's song is an auditory crime. But the point stands. They reached Corridor 12, where a convenient maintenance shaft provided access to multiple sections of the station. I've spent 2 decades trying to keep the peace. Maybe I've been doing it wrong. Maybe peace isn't about keeping everyone separate and quiet. Maybe it's about giving them something to build together. Even if that something is tax fraud and drinking songs. Tax optimization, Jake corrected automatically. Sure, that. Krell pointed at the maintenance shaft. That goes directly to docking bay 7. Your ship is in bay 9. You'll have to cut through 2 storage areas and pass the recycling center, but you won't run into any security checkpoints. Pip was blinking all 3 eyes in different rhythms again. Officer Krell, I feel like I should object to this on principle. Noted and ignored. Go file the incident reports. Leave the parts about suspects escaping blank. I'll fill those in later with suitably embarrassing details about my own incompetence. You're going to get in trouble for this, Priya said. Probably, but I've got 23 years of day, service, and a spotless record. They'd have to work pretty hard to push me out. Krell checked his chronometer with one hand, while pulling out his citation pad with another. You've got about 8 minutes before my pursuit brings me down this corridor. I'd suggest you use them wisely. Jake snapped off a surprisingly crisp salute. Officer Krell, you're a credit to law enforcement everywhere. I'm an idiot who's going to spend the next month explaining this to my supervisor. Now get out of here before I remember I have integrity. They moved toward the maintenance shaft, but Priya paused. Next week, Sector 7. We'll be there. I'll make sure to schedule extra patrols, somewhere else. Krell turned away, then called back over his shoulder. And maybe consider teaching them something less controversial than tax law. Music theory, perhaps. Or creative writing. Oh, we're definitely teaching them about shell companies next, Jake called back, already halfway into the shaft. It's going to be great. Krell watched them disappear into the maintenance corridor, then turned to Pip, who was standing there looking like he'd just witnessed the fundamental laws of reality rewrite themselves. Pip. Yes, Officer Krell. If you tell anyone about this, I'll assign you to Waste Reclamation Patrol for a year. My lips are sealed. Well, my mouth equivalent. I don't technically have lips. Good. Krell started walking back toward the security office, already composing the incident report in his head. It was going to be a masterpiece of creative writing, vague enough to avoid outright lies, detailed enough to sound plausible, and absolutely guaranteed to make him look just incompetent enough that Thrace would believe it. Come on, we've got 4 hours left on shift. 3 hours and 47 minutes, Pip corrected, because he was still counting. Not anymore. Now we've got to write up how 2 unarmed humans outmaneuvered a veteran security officer through clever use of maintenance shafts. Krell pulled out his datapad and started typing. I'm thinking I'll say one of them distracted me by asking about filing procedures. while the other one slipped away. Makes me look stupid but not corrupt. That's actually pretty smart. 23 years, Pip. You learn a few things. He paused mid-type. Also, for the record, if anyone asks, we never discuss tax optimization strategies, cultural exchange programs, or drinking songs with questionable rhyme schemes. What drinking songs? Pip asked innocently. Exactly. They walked back through the station corridors, past the bar where Krell could still hear the muffled sounds of celebration. Apparently, the crowd had decided that the humans' narrow escape called for another round of whatever cultural exchange looked like when humans weren't there to lead it. Krell's comm unit chirped. It was Thrace. Officer Krell, status report. Do you have the suspects in custody? Krell took a deep breath with all three of his respiratory systems. Sir, I regret to inform you that the suspects escaped during transport. They exploited my momentary distraction to access a maintenance corridor. I've initiated pursuit protocols, but they have a significant head start. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, you lost them. Yes, sir. You lost 2 humans. In my defense, sir, they were very sneaky humans. Another silence. Longer this time. Krell could practically hear Thrace's blood pressure rising through the comm unit. File your report, Thrace finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. And Officer Krell, this goes in your permanent record. Understood, sir. The comm clicked off. Pip looked up at Krell with all 3 eyes wide. Are you going to be okay? Krell thought about it. Thought about 23 years of by-the-book service. Thought about a Blorillian and a Zentarii bonding over bad poetry. Thought about how sometimes the rules existed to keep order. And sometimes order wasn't the same thing as peace. Yeah, he said finally. I think I'm going to be just fine. They reached the security office. Through the window, Krell could see his desk, his filing cabinet, his lukewarm coffee from 6 hours ago that had probably achieved sentience by now. 4 hours left on his shift. Well, 3 hours and 43 minutes if you were Pip. Krell sat down at his desk and opened up a new incident report form. The cursor blinked at him expectantly. He started typing. At approximately 1,847 station time, Officers Krell and Pip responded to a noise complaint at Nebula's end bar. Upon arrival, we found a small gathering that had exceeded acceptable volume parameters. After issuing a verbal warning, the gathering dispersed peacefully. No arrests were deemed necessary. In an unrelated incident during routine patrol, 2 human civilians evaded custody by exploiting a temporary lapse in security protocol. Pip read over his shoulder. You know, that's technically all true. The best lies usually are, Krell kept typing. Now go get started on your report. And remember, I know. Nothing about tax optimization, cultural exchange, or songs about country roads. Or bottles of beer. Especially not the bottles of beer. Pip scurried off to his own desk, and Krell finished his report with the kind of careful precision that came from 2 decades of experience in creative documentation. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a small smile. Somewhere on this station, 2 humans were probably already planning next week's seminar. Somewhere, a Blorillian and a Zentarii were probably still arguing about poetry. Somewhere, a crystalline being was humming country roads to itself and feeling less alone in the universe. And somewhere, a station commander was having a very bad evening. Krell's smile widened slightly. 3 hours and 38 minutes until end of shift. He could make it. And next week, he'd make sure to schedule himself very, very far away from Sector 7. But not too far. Just in case. After all, somebody had to make sure the humans didn't burn down the station. Or teach the aliens about offshore accounts. Or introduce them to whatever the Scotsman was about. On second thought, he definitely needed to be nearby next week. For security purposes. Obviously. His comm unit chirped again. This time it was a text message from an unknown sender. Thanks for the assist, officer. Next week we're teaching them about the difference between corporations and LLCs. It's gonna be wild. Jake and Priya. P.S. Attached is a guide to meal deductions for law enforcement. You're welcome. Krell stared at the message. Then at the attached file. Then at his cold coffee. 23 years on the job, and he was now officially an accessory to humanity. He opened the file. It was very well organized. 3 hours and 36 minutes until end of shift. Future Krell was definitely going to hate him for this. But present Krell? Present Krell was learning about meal deductions, and honestly, the humans had a point. He'd been buying lunch in the station cafeteria for 2 decades. That added up. Maybe, just maybe, chaos species had their uses after all.